Okay, this is take 2 now. Welcome to our Understanding Stasis Theory workshop. My name's Claire. I'm the graduate coordinator for the Undergraduate Writing Center at Texas Tech and the Graduate Writing Center at Texas Tech. I'm really happy you guys are here today. Hopefully this will help you understand stasis theory a little bit better. I know that it can be a difficult topic to wrap your head around if you haven't really heard of it before or don't have much experience with it. But we have some examples in here, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a much better understanding of what stasis theory is, and especially how you can use it in your writing. Because I know some of you may be in English 1302, or you may just be using it for another class, or even thinking about the world today and all the different issues we have going on that people are debating. This can be really helpful in just helping you understand some of those things. First, I did want to mention our services at the Undergraduate Writing Center. We're really here to offer writing support to all undergraduate students at TTU. You can come at any stage of the writing process. It can be any assignment, whether it's for a class, not for a class, like a resume, scholarship, essay, really anything you're writing, we can help with. We encourage you to use us early and often. You can have 3 consultations with us a week. They just can't be on the same day. So make sure you keep that in mind. And as you're working on projects, especially essays, or longer pieces of writing you might be working on, that you go ahead and start scheduling appointments with us. And that way you can get help throughout the process and you're using our services for all that they're worth, right? And you can schedule a consultation by us or with us through our website, which is going to be uwc.ttu.edu, or you can call us at that number on the screen, or email us at that email on the screen, and we'll be happy to set you up with an appointment. We are completely virtual this semester. In past semesters, we've offered face-to-face consulting as well, but as you know, right now, many things have moved to virtual. So we're not sure when we'll be able to go back to face-to-face consulting. So for the time being, we'll be virtual, just so you know. So let's get started with stasis theory. Okay, so the workshop goals for today, we want to define stasis theory, really get an understanding of what it is and why people use it, identify its characteristics, and then consider how to actually use it in your writing, because I know that that's what a lot of you are probably really looking for. Okay. So first, let's define stasis theory. So stasis theory is a 4-question process for developing knowledge and analyzing discussions. It's really helpful if you're doing any sort of research and then writing about it and you're analyzing sources, analyzing an issue, that sort of thing. Really, it's a process by which we can kind of think through issues and different perspectives on issues, right? So we can think about different perspectives, where people stand, and how those understandings relate to each other. And stasis theory actually has 4 components to it. It has different levels of questioning that go with it. So this is the process we want to think through, and that's fact, definition, quality, and policy. So fact's going to be that first level, and then definition, quality, and policy. And each of these different levels have kind of questions that go with them, or things you want to think about that help us think through issues, and especially where people are agreeing and disagreeing on an issue. The one thing I will point out is that if people don't agree on a lower level of stasis theory, so if you're not agreeing on the facts, there's no way you can agree at the higher levels like definition, quality, and policy. If you're not agreeing on quality, there's no way that you can agree on policy. Hopefully that makes sense to anybody. Okay. So let's look at that first level, facts. So this is pretty self-explanatory, but you just want to gather the facts on any given issue. So some questions you might ask yourself as you're using stasis theory in your writing or using it to examine an issue is, did something happen? So does this thing even exist? Is there a problem slash issue? Those can also be questions like, what has occurred? Why did it happen? And is change even possible? So really, we're just gathering those very basic facts when you're talking about the fact level of stasis theory. And again, if you don't agree on these things, there's no way you can move on to agreeing on the others. Okay. That next level is going to be definition. So those questions are a little bit more complex. So we agree that this thing exists. We agree on what it is. So what's the nature of it? What kind of issue is it? What are the different components or elements of it, right? So what's making this up? And if this is a little bit confusing, don't worry, we'll put concrete examples to it in a second, but I just want you to get exposed to what kind of questions you might be asking yourself as you approach these issues in your writing. After definition comes the quality stage. This is where you start to move away from more of those really straightforward, basic understandings, and you're really thinking more complexly about the issue. And this is where people can often start disagreeing. So you're thinking, is this issue positive or negative? Are there any consequences? And what could occur if the issue or problem is not addressed? And so again, you want to make sure you're agreeing on the fact and definition level before you can ever agree on quality. Lastly, we have policy. So these are questions like, okay, we agree about what this is, the nature of it. We agree about if it's positive or negative, those sorts of things. So should action be taken? Is this something that needs to be resolved? And then who it would be involved in that? Whose responsibility is it to take action? And how should this be done? Right? And you're thinking of different options that should be taken. So a lot of times you can remember that policy takes place, on kind of that governmental level where we're thinking about laws or guidelines or even institutional policies like we may have at Texas Tech. Okay. So those are the 4 levels. Okay, and so let's look at a concrete example. So climate change, that's an issue that a lot of people debate, right? So let's think about that. If we're looking at it on the first level fact, we would ask a question like, does climate change exist? Is it even real, right? Some people say no, some people say yes. If those people can't agree, then that's kind of where the issue dies in their discussion. They can't ever agree on anything else if they don't agree that it exists or doesn't exist, right? However, if they do agree, so say they agree that climate change exists, we move on to definition and we're going to ask the question, okay, so what's causing climate change? Some people think it might be man-made, right? Because we have all these different technologies, cars, that sort of thing. And some people might think that it's, just a natural process occurring. If we agree on that, we can then move to quality, which would be the type of question like, okay, so what would occur if no action is taken, right? So we might think, do we need to resolve this? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Should we just leave it alone? We're considering those sorts of questions. And then if you agree that action does need to be taken, you're thinking about policy. So what kind of action is taken? How do we actually go about addressing this? Do there need to be certain environmental laws in place? Do we need to use restrictions here? That sort of questioning. Okay. Another example that may be really relevant to everyone right now is COVID-19. So you know that there's a lot of disagreement on this issue. So the fact level might be, does COVID even exist? and some people say yes, and some people say no, right? And again, if they don't agree on that, there's no way you can move forward in the discussion. If you do agree either way, you can move on to the definition portion. Okay, so we agree it exists. Is it similar to the flu? Is it seasonal? Exactly what is it? That's where you really get into that question. Once you agree on that, then it's like, okay, we know it exists, we know what it is, but is it serious? How serious is it? What would happen if we didn't do anything about it, if we didn't do anything to prevent it? What would those consequences be, and would they be good or bad? And then once you agree on that, you can start thinking about policy. So if you want to take action, what kind of action should be taken? Do we want to open up businesses? Do we want to close down businesses? Do we want to mandate masks? Do we not want to? Those sorts of questions are going to be at the policy level. And I'll remind you one more time, if you don't agree on a lower level, you cannot move forward in stasis theory. Okay. And so I was wondering, does anybody have, like an issue they would want to talk through with the group? Maybe an issue you're working on for your mapping the conversation essay, or just something you're curious about. If not, that's okay. But I just wanted to open it up and give anyone an opportunity to kind of talk through what stasis theory might look like for that specific issue. And Dustin, I might need you to call it out if somebody mentions it in the chat.
Sure, no problem. So yeah, just reiterating what Claire was saying, this is a really great chance for you to get the group to help you brainstorm through your issue if you have one you'd like to talk about.
Also, if you have any questions about these examples or up until this point, I'd be happy to answer some of those, but just know we will have time for questions at the end.
So Claire, if no one else has an issue, I know you and I were talking before. Oh, no, let's use Liani's. Yes. Oh, so Liani is saying maybe her microphone is not working as well. So thank you for letting me know that, Liani. But Liani has one. Maybe using machine learning in healthcare. So using machine learning in healthcare as an issue.
That's really interesting. So let's think about that. So if we're thinking about on the fact level, Liani, do you have an idea, and you can throw it in the chat, about what a question for the fact level might be?
I was muted. So Liani came up with the question, is machine learning effective for research? In terms of the does it exist part.
So yeah, thinking about machine learning, you might actually be getting at the higher levels at that point. And the key word there is effective. Right? So you might actually be thinking at the higher levels right there. But in terms of machine learning, I think that's a really good direction to go in. So you can think about how effective is it, weigh the pros and cons, right? What are the consequences of it? If you want to go back down to the lower levels, if you're thinking about definition, you're thinking about the different components of it, right? So what exactly is machine learning? What are its attributes? What makes machine learning, and what does it do, right? And so thinking about it that way. And then you can kind of think about those ethical issues, and its effectiveness, and then talk about, whatever action you think needs to be taken. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Claire, and then Liani was saying fact would be more like, does it exist? Which I think I would agree with. So fact might be something like machine learning is possible, or machine learning is not possible, right? Like some kind of question like that.
Right,
like
exactly.
That this process is even valid, right? Yeah, so that would be more like a fact level question, right?
Yes, the thing to keep in mind with fact questions is like they are so basic. So keep that in mind as you're working through issues and writing about them. The fact level really is that very most basic level of like, does this exist? Is it even a viable process? Just like Leonie was saying. So I think that's a great example. Okay,
Claire,
perfect.
Claire, can I throw out a kind of, I hate to say silly, but a kind of less academic example that I was just thinking about this morning?
Yes, of course.
So there's a debate within the very important institution of professional football, the
Mhm.
NFL, about the NFL's overtime rules. Basically, as it exists now, if two teams are tied at the end of regular play, right, they go back out and they flip a coin. Whoever wins the coin toss gets to decide to have the ball or not,
Mhm.
right? So basically, they always decide to have the ball because there's no reason they wouldn't at that point. Um, so who gets the ball is basically determined by a random 50-50 coin toss. And I mean, it's statistically shown and it makes sense that whoever gets the ball, there's an overwhelming advantage that they're going to win. Not necessarily they're going to win, but there's an overwhelming advantage. So there's all kinds of like discussions about how to make overtime rules in the NFL more fair. And one idea is kind of that one team gets to decide where the ball is going to be placed, like in the field, but the other team gets to decide who gets it. So if my team gets to decide, well, we're going to put the ball like way down on like the 1 yard line, the other team can say, okay, then you have the ball, right? But if we say, oh, we're going to put the ball right in the middle of the field, the other team can say, I have the ball. So it just adds this whole level of strategy. But I guess my big issue would be like fact level. Is it a fact um, that the current rules of the current overtime rules in the NFL are unfair?
Mhm.
And then definition, like, would you say that's a fair fact level for that?
Yes, absolutely.
I re- and I realize that this is a strange example. It's something I heard on the radio this morning. Yeah, and then like the quality issue would be like kind of how unfair is it? Is it like so unfair that we really need to do something, or what's? And then the policy is like, well, how are we going to change the rules,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I think that's a really good example. Okay.
thank you.
Well, so let's go ahead and move forward and talk about how we might be able to actually use stasis theory in writing once we've kind of started understanding it and dissecting these issues. So there's a few major ways that stasis theory can help us with our writing. It can help us summarize an issue, right? If we're using stasis theory to really understand the different components and levels of an issue, then we can really summarize it a lot better, right? Because we'll understand it more deeply. It also helps us identify points of agreement or disagreement among stakeholders. This is really helpful when you're bringing in outside research, and there's different people that have different points of view on the issue. It can really help you make those connections between where they're agreeing and where they're not, right? Maybe they're agreeing on the fact level, but not the definition level or something like that. Or maybe they're agreeing on all levels. And then you can synthesize those points of view and explain their significance. And all that synthesis means is you're finding a way to talk about them together, explaining how your sources and points of view relate to each other. And so, again, you can see how stasis theory would help us do that, right? Because we can say, well, they agree about the facts, but not about the nature, or they agree about the facts and the nature of the issue, but not whether action needs to be taken, that sort of thing. Okay. And so when you're actually using it in your writing, some tips to use it really effectively, because I know this can be confusing, always try to outline the issue beforehand. So you might jot down, okay, so what is that? are those fact issues for this one? Would the definition questions be? If you do that beforehand as you're working through your issue, it'll be a lot less confusing than if you just sit down to write your full draft and then you're trying to figure out where the stasis theory comes in and you get confused by all the points of view. So I always suggest mapping it out beforehand and doing a little bit of outlining. Okay, and then always make sure you clarify your instructor's expectations for incorporating stasis theory. You know, they might want you to be really explicit about your use of stasis theory and say they agree on quality, or these two disagree at the policy level, or they might want you to be a little bit more subtle about it. So always make sure you clarify your instructor's expectations. And then you want to optimize. So really use stasis theory as a tool to address the connections and agreements and disagreements, and anything in regards to how your sources or stakeholders relate to each other. Stasis theory is really a great way for you to synthesize and really map that conversation. So definitely be making use of it in your writing. And then for a more practical piece of advice on it, you might try using the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank. This is a website that's really helpful and it's exactly what it sounds like. It just has a lot of different phrases you can use in your writing. Specifically when using stasis theory, you'll probably they have a section on referring to sources. And then they have subsections on summarizing and synthesizing. And like I said, stasis theory can really help you do both those things. So if you look at those different phrases, then you might have some more practical tools for how you can actually incorporate these ideas into your writing. So that might be, you know, although author A thinks this way, author B disagrees and thinks this, right? Or if they agree, you might say similarly or in the same vein, you know, or author B supports this view. If they disagree, you might say contrarily, unlike author A, author B believes this, or even a word like conversely. So the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank is going to have so many options for you to look at. I really encourage you to look at that, not just for an assignment where you're using stasis theory, but any assignment at all throughout your college career. Okay, so does anybody have any questions or another example they'd like to talk about? I can go ahead and stop sharing. Oh, well, we have a small crowd, so.
Yep. Well, thanks so much for that, Clara. I mean, it was really valuable. I hope people will come and check out the recording. I trust that they will. Yeah, but really appreciate your help with this very important